So hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this meeting. We might still have some people coming in, so we can start off with um, just some introductions and welcoming you to the meeting. If you have any technical difficulties or questions throughout the webinar, you can use the chat feature or you can raise your hand. The raise hand feature is on the top part of your bar. It's a little hand. And if you click that, it will show us that you want to ask a question. So like that, we don't have people suddenly starting to talk because that can be a bit jarring. But please feel free to send a message if you have any questions. Of course, you signed up for the event, so you know what it's about. We're going to be talking about autism and autism advocacy. This is from the Activate project. And I think we can start off with the introductions. So, hi, I'm your host today. My name is Lyric. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an employee over here at CRPD, but I'm also a student reading for a master's in disability studies. I'm also the founder of Autistic Community Malta, which is what we aim to be the first autism-led NGO here in Malta. I was late diagnosed as autistic at the age of 19. And then I had other diagnoses that followed, such as ADHD and later on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and all of the co-occurring conditions that come with that. So I'll be your host for today. If you wish to share anything about yourselves, who you are, where you're coming from, if you're an autistic person yourself, feel free to share in the chat as well. So a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about today. So first, we're going to be talking about what autism is. And I know that most of you would have an idea of what autism is, but we'll also be challenging some of the popular beliefs that we have on autism. We're going to be talking about autism from the neurodivergent paradigm, as opposed to some of the more outdated paradigms that we may have come across. And our aim is to move beyond just the stereotypes and stigma as well. Then we'll talk about the Activate project itself, such as what our goals were for the project, the research we did. We're going to talk about the Autism Advocacy Academy and also the workshops and other engagement we did through this project. And you're asking if everyone is able to hear me? Yes. Okay, hopefully. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. And also, we're going to be talking about autism advocacy itself. We're going to delve a bit more deeper into that. Of course, this is only for 1 hour, so we can't go super into depth. So we're going to be talking about the importance of advocacy as a skill rather than something that just people naturally have, something that you need to work on. Some barriers to advocacy, because there are some specific challenges that we face, especially as autistic individuals. The implications of advocacy in different sectors as well. Trying to advocate for yourself in an employment setting is completely different to a healthcare setting and vice versa. And also, we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion. So if you want to hold off on any questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. But at the end, we hope to have a bit of a Q&A. And we'll also talk about some ways to move forward to a more neuro-affirmative and inclusive future as well. Perfect. So what is autism? Okay, so a lot of us will be coming in with some ideas of autism. Some of them might not necessarily be what we are fighting for as the autistic community, but we're here to learn and we're here to challenge. And again, if anyone has any questions, there's no such thing as a stupid question, so please feel free. So some of us think of autism as a disability, some say neurotype, some say it's a superpower, some say it's a disorder. Some people still say that it's a disease as well. There's many views on what autism is. Of course, we'll talk about a bit of a definition of autism as well afterwards. I'll be providing one of my own. I see autism as both a disability and a neurotype. I don't really subscribe to it being a superpower, and I definitely don't subscribe to it being a disorder or a disease. I think that sometimes we fall into a trap of seeing autism as either entirely good or entirely bad. But in reality, it's just another way of being human. It's like we're saying introverted versus extroverted. Of course, being autistic does come with its own challenges, especially in a world that is not built for us autistic people. So that's why we say it is a disability, because a disability is not a bad word. And you might be seeing the two symbols there. If people are autistic here, please bear with me. I'm just trying to explain why we don't use certain things as well. Because I still, on the internet or in real life, I constantly hear people saying things like, oh, it's a superpower, or, oh, it's a disease. So I'm trying to sort of say why we don't use these things. Another thing that I see very often, and a lot of autistic people are not happy that we see it very often, is the puzzle piece. It is quite an outdated symbol. It's even seen as a hate symbol. There is a minority of autistic people that do use this symbol, but again, it is a minority. So typically we use the golden infinity sign instead. You might also see the rainbow infinity sign, but that is for neurodiversity in general as well. So a little bit of that. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Now, this is the definition that I use for autism. So autism is a very neurotype and disability that usually has traits such as differences in communication, specialized and intense interests or focus, stimming, and differences in sensory experiences. So you can just note some of the language here. I used traits, differences, specialized intents, and differences. If you go on something like the DSM, you'll normally see something like symptoms or deficits. And we're trying to move away from those sort of terms. And that's called using neuroaffirmative language. You might think, oh, they're just words, but words do have an impact on how we think about things. So that's why it's super important to use words that are neuroaffirmative. So hopefully we can move away from deficit-based and pathologizing language into more neuroaffirming language. And I acknowledge that this can be a bit challenging, especially if someone's coming from the medical field. When I studied psychology and we talked about autism, it was always in terms of deficit rather than differences. So it even took me a bit of time to adjust to more neuroaffirming language. So again, instead of symptom, disorder, deficit, you can try using trait, disability, or difference. And now we can move on to some myth busting. So number one myth, when people think autism, usually what I get is people think of it as a straight line. It isn't. You might see people using the color wheel analogy. I like using the DJ slider analogy instead. So it's not just one small, not very autistic to very autistic. That's too simple. Brains are not simple at all, which is what makes them so cool to learn about. Instead, you can think of different traits of an autistic person. So, for example, you can think of communication, you can think of sensory experiences, you can think of fine motor skills even. So for example, with me, my communication most days is pretty okay. So you can say that that is a bit lower down, but I am very sensitive and very insensitive to certain sensory experiences. So that can be way up. And it changes a little bit depending on the day as well. If I'm super tired, I'm not able to regulate my emotions or my sensory experiences as much as if I've had a full 8 hours sleep and a whole day of rest. So again, try not think of the autism spectrum as just a straight line. It's a lot more complicated than that. Every single autistic person is different. And you need to learn about the person themselves and how they work rather than just saying, okay, I'm an autistic person, so all of these checklists. Okay, so, and another thing with language and terminology, we don't say mild, moderate, or severe. We aren't a curry. It's just, and we don't use high functioning or low functioning either, because that sort of negates, if you're saying someone is high functioning, you're negating the challenges that they might face and the support they might need. And if you're saying someone is low functioning, you're discounting their agency and the strengths that they do have. So typically, even when you get a diagnosis, it should say a level of support needs. So level 1 support needs is obviously when they need the least amount of support, but they still do need support. There's level 2 medium support needs and level 3 high support needs. But again, every single person has their own constellation of support needs, and a person might not necessarily, their appearance may not reflect the support needs that they have. And another thing that I see, for example, when asking for accommodations or in the medical field, is I have a lot of people saying that when they are classified as low support needs, people say that they don't need any support, but that's not true. We do need to talk about medium support needs people more often than people stuck in the middle, because typically they find it challenging to find support for their particular presentation of autism. And high support needs individuals still do deserve agency, and they deserve to have their strengths recognized as well. Another thing is that autism has no look. If you are an autistic person, I'm sure you've heard, oh, but you don't look autistic. And if people's cameras were on, don't worry, you don't need to switch them on. I'm sure a few people just cringed. But autism does not have a look. Every single presentation, whether it be someone who can pass as holistic, or if someone's presentation changes, or if someone's presentation is stereotypical, they're still valid as an autistic person, and they still deserve to be respected and supported for who they are. If you are a person that has said, oh, but you don't look autistic in the past, unfortunately, it's not something that we typically want to hear, because it can be seen as quite dismissive. So just keep that in mind the next autistic person you come across. And onto some autistic traits. So, for example, a common one is differences in communication. This may mean that someone either speaks in a different tone of voice, uses different vocabulary or cadence to what is typically used in their native culture. You might hear that I don't really sound Maltese. I'm fully Maltese, born and raised here. But this is quite a common phenomenon where Maltese autistic people don't typically sound Maltese. It can mean that someone cannot speak verbally and instead would use either augmentative and alternative communication, AAC for short, or sign language if they are able, or people can have something called verbal shutdowns, which I experience as well, which are periods of time where you cannot verbally speak and instead you need to rely on other means. There's differences in sensory experiences, and this doesn't only mean that someone is too sensitive to sounds, smells, or noises, even though that's definitely the case, but it can also mean that you are not sensitive enough to sensory experiences. That's called being hyposensitive, where you need extra stimulation to feel regulated. For example, a lot of autistic people like deep pressure. That's why you'll see a lot of people who are autistic using weighted blankets. That's a form of sensory seeking rather than avoidance. There's also differences in learning, and this doesn't only mean, of course, autism and intellectual disability are not the same at all, but a lot of autistic people do have co-occurring intellectual disability. There's a high rate of that. There's also a high rate of autistic people also having ADHD. Again, this does not mean every single person, far from, but that is a common thing. But again, we have differences in our focus, we have our special interests, and that could mean that mainstream education can be a bit more difficult for us, alongside a lot of different aspects that make education a bit more difficult for us. And again, the intense and specialized focus and interest, which I mentioned previously. So even though these traits are not negative at all by themselves, they can definitely make the world a bit more difficult to navigate. That is, again, why autism is classified as a disability. And it is especially difficult when we are not understood. And this is where self-advocacy comes into play. And that leads us to the Activate project. So let's go into that a little bit. So Activate was started in 2023, was co-founded by the EU, and it is in collaboration with KU Leuven, Impact Sci, UCAP, Voz de Autista, and CRPD Plus. And yeah, okay. So the research was done by KU Leuven, and we did research. We had research from 97 autistic youths to build the Autism Advocacy Academy. So from the beginning of the academy, autistic people were included at all levels. So it was mostly about identifying barriers that autistic people face in different areas of life, and also how could the curriculum itself be made more accessible and neuro-affirming. There was also awareness raising and discussions. We had a variety of workshops, which was an opportunity for a discussion between the stakeholders and the autistic individuals themselves. We had quite a good turnout for the ones that we organized here in Malta. There's also the My Autism Journey campaign, which you can view the videos and articles and stories written by autistic people themselves on the website neuroadvocacy.eu. Andrea, I'm not sure if you can put the link for that. Yeah. Perfect, thank you. Could you put the link for neuroadvocacy.eu in the, if anyone wants to check out the campaign and some more details on the project if you're interested. And there's also the live Q&A sessions, which are starting to be uploaded to YouTube, so keep an eye out for those. If you follow any of the socials of the partners of the project, they should be shared there as well. So you'll be notified when they're up. And we also had lots of videos and testimonials on project updates presented by autistic individuals themselves. Again, these can be viewed either on the website or on the social media of all the project partners. And the most important part of the project, I feel, is the Autism Advocacy Academy itself. This was for youths aged 16 to 29, and it was a 6-unit curriculum covering advocacy, education, healthcare, employment, legal rights, and digital activism. So again, quite a few different sectors were covered in this academy. They were organized in hybrid format, and they included live sessions and also sessions that were pre-recorded so people could listen in their own time, read at their own time, and we had pre-prepared materials as well so that the sessions were more structured. In the sessions themselves, we explored the barriers that we faced in the sector of the sector that we were talking about. We also practiced strategies, and we also learned about autistic people's rights as well. The main goal of the project, though, was elevating the voices of autistic youth, providing with the tools, knowledge, and confidence to self-advocate for their needs and rights. And that can lead us to the next part, which is about barriers and inaccessibility that we face in different sectors. Of course, again, this would be different for everyone, but we'll talk about what I have found in research, my own experience, and my experience in interacting with the autistic community. So autism is an intrinsic part of the self, can't be removed, switched off, or left behind. This is actually why we tend to prefer autistic person rather than person with autism, because historically there have been a lot of attempts to remove autism from the person, and a lot of us have reclaimed that as a part of our identities. Again, not every autistic person uses that language in particular. We are all different people, but for the most part, people do typically prefer autistic person for this reason. And of course, autism affects us in every area of our lives. And I think this is sometimes forgotten about. If we see a person, an autistic person at work, we think, oh, okay, they're in employment. They can switch their autism off for 8 hours. Doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Well, fortunately and unfortunately depends on the person. So let's talk about employment first. So there's different challenges with employment. Um, Typically, the people face challenges before they even have the job, before they even go for the interview. And that barrier is with job descriptions. You might be saying why. It's because people typically put very high standards and requirements in the job descriptions when that might not necessarily be 100% strictly necessary. And as autistic people, we sometimes take that a bit literally and think, okay, if I don't have 20 years of experience, I can't apply for this job, when that's not the case. So that's the first, this is the first challenge that we face. Another challenge is the interviews themselves. There's lots of human interaction, little subtle things and rules that typically don't really make sense to us. I don't think they make sense for most people, but it is a huge barrier with interviews themselves. The workplace culture is a barrier that's not typically talked about much. And I find that especially locally here in Malta, workplace culture is a huge factor to keeping employment and making connections, making sure that you're comfortable at work and that you're able to move up in your career. Those are all very much barriers again. Commuting itself, especially again in Malta, we have quite an unreliable bus service, depending on where you are in the island, and especially out in this heat without shelter can be very distressing. Communication itself, again, for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier. Spiky profiles, which are when typically in autistic people, we are very good at some things and very not good at other things. So we have a profile that looks like this. That can be extremely valuable in the workplace. There's a lot of information about how beneficial this is to the workplace, but unfortunately, it's also not very known about. And people might not necessarily be prepared to have an employee with a spiky profile. There's also the element of meltdowns and shutdowns, which again will come up in a lot of other sectors here. There's also the sensory environments of, for example, an office, or if you work retail, there's music, there's people talking all the time. So different areas of employment can have different sensory environments that might pose a challenge. Another sensory thing that we might not be talking about as much as we should is temperature as well, especially for autistic people who work outside or who work in places that may not have temperature control. Can be very, very challenging for them. And also autistic burnout, which is something that really does need to be talked about more. Autistic burnout is different to occupational burnout. It's not just in one area of life. Autistic burnout affects the person quite severely, and it can sometimes even permanently take away basic levels of functioning. autistic burnout can leave someone unable to keep up with hygiene or keep up with healthcare or food, basically keeping themselves alive. So it's a lot more challenging than just dealing with occupational burnout. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to talk about autistic burnout in depth, but there are a lot of resources and a lot of autistic people speaking online about this topic, especially now. So if you're interested, I encourage you to look more into it. With education, there's also the sensory aspect of uniforms and dress code, which can be extremely distracting and also very painful for autistic people, especially for long hours. We have different learning styles that may not be accommodated for. There's the bullying and social pressure, which can make school a very hostile place to be. There's rules and conformity, sometimes even unspoken rules, which can be extremely difficult to navigate. Again, communication, sensory environments, burnout, meltdowns and shutdowns, those are going to reoccur quite often, and sometimes also differences in attention as well. Healthcare. Healthcare is quite one that's close to my heart. When you're dealing with, for example, hospital, there's a loss of control and routine, two things that are extremely important for an autistic person. So it can make it even more difficult to advocate for yourself as well when you're in these environments. This goes for all of the sectors as well. If you are dysregulated and you don't feel in control, you don't feel like you can make a difference, you don't feel understood, those are massive barriers to advocacy. Co-occurring conditions can also come into play. For example, if you have, like, for example, 5 other physical health related conditions, it can make it more complex. You need to explain it to doctors more. They might not necessarily know about these conditions. Because genetic wise, there's a few things that we are more susceptible to, and that can make things more complicated for either you or your guardian, whoever's with you, to be able to advocate for your needs. There's also differences in pain tolerance and pain expression. So someone might be in 8 to 10 on 10 pain, and we might not necessarily have the right facial expressions to be able to convey that to the doctor. And very often people are accused of faking, especially when we might have very large reactions to things that are not typically seen as painful, for example, like light touch or like putting on hospital gown. So a lot of misunderstandings can occur there. Um, there's also overwhelm and burnout again that might lead to people avoiding healthcare altogether. There's a lot of bureaucracy, lots of signing papers, and lots of jumping through hoops, going from doctor to doctor. It can be very tiring and overwhelming. And again, sensory environments and aversions, for example, even to medication, can be a barrier to healthcare. Policy and legal rights, there's a lot of barriers here as well, such as jargon or inaccessible language. This is something I struggle with a lot. I'm trying to learn more about law and all of that stuff, but it is a lot of text and a lot of it doesn't make sense, and they try and make it as difficult as possible to understand for some reason. So that can be a huge barrier to an autistic person. Again, that coupled with the overwhelm and burnout, there's a lot of networking, okay, social shenanigans that people have to work with to be able to advocate for themselves better. Again, especially considering the local context, where in Malta you need to know people to get somewhere. There's the expectations and the presentation. You have to look a certain way to seem trustworthy. This again goes for a lot of different sectors that we're talking about today. There's also the financial cost and the financial risk of pursuing, for example, a case of discrimination that can be, again, very overwhelming to deal with. And there's also the safety aspect of it as well. Online advocacy as well. This is becoming a lot more relevant as well. There's been quite a rise of autistic advocates and activists online. That is where I started off. Um, uh, and I think this should be talked about more as well locally. Again, networking is a barrier to this, but also safety. For example, a lot of people don't know that you shouldn't film on your street or you shouldn't film near a window because then people can find out where you are, which, especially being on a small island, is very, very easy to do. Um, uh, there's bullying, a lot of hate that's unregulated as well. You might think that social media has their inbuilt safety, but unfortunately, it's not. Um, uh, it can be very fast paced. You have to keep up with a lot of either trends or algorithms and all of this stuff, which might again lead to overwhelm and burnout. There's the accessibility features that you need to think about, not only when you are an activist online, where you need to input them yourselves, which takes more work. But also when you are a person online on the internet, is this accessible to you? For example, even something as simple as captions can be incredibly useful for an autistic person, especially since a lot of us struggle with auditory processing. There's also access to technology as well, access to the internet. That might be a barrier as well. A lot of autistic people struggle with fine motor skills, so that can make things like typing very difficult. Again, expectations and presentation and communication. But as well, online advocacy can be incredibly useful for autistic people, where outside might be a less controllable space to be in. And we can start talking about autistic advocacy itself. Again, if you have any questions in particular in the chat, I will be keeping an eye out. But again, we have the Q&A at the very end as well. So we talked about a lot of barriers. So now we can talk about the importance of advocacy itself. So advocacy doesn't only improve access for the individual, which is super important, but it also paves the way for others. If you are speaking to a person and you're trying to get an accommodation or trying to get understanding, the person that you're speaking to will remember that, hopefully. And the next time that they have someone that is like you, they would be able to know what to do at least a little bit better. Another important thing about advocacy is that nobody knows themselves better than oneself. Um, a big issue that I've seen is that when you're advocating for accommodations, that they say, oh, okay, you're autistic level 1, so you need XYZ. Not necessarily, you might need different things. So that's why it's important to advocate for yourself, because again, most likely no one will know what you in particular need. Again, every single autistic person is different. And also it improves your confidence and also allows you to be more authentic to yourself. So also, again, when you're advocating for yourself, you are also advocating for other people. This is something that I always try and speak about. These are some of the autistic activists that have impacted my work, and without some of them, I wouldn't even be diagnosed as autistic. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into what every single one of these people have done. But if you do have the time, I do recommend that you look up some of the people's names. Advocacy, unfortunately, is not something we are born with. Of course, some people might be more naturally inclined to it than others, but again, it is a learned skill and it's something that needs to be practiced. And it is quite difficult as well. People think that, oh, okay, advocating for yourself is, you're just saying what you need, but it is quite challenging. You need to know what you need. First of all, you need to know yourself, and then you need to be able to assess the situation that you are in. You need to assess that social aspect, who you're speaking to. Then you need to calculate how to speak to them. If something goes wrong or they misunderstand you, how do you keep yourself safe? There's all these different things that come up with advocacy as well. Again, unique challenges that autistic people face in advocacy is communication differences, especially if, for example, you're speaking to someone, let's say that you're speaking to even like a police officer. You had a meltdown in public and someone decided to call the police on you. Again, you might think that this is exaggerated. It's unfortunately not. It's a very common occurrence. So now you're in a sticky situation. You need to be able to regulate yourself. You need to be able to know how to speak to this person, and you need to know how to keep yourself safe, first of all. And that can be extremely difficult, especially if this is something that you haven't practiced, or again, advocacy is a learned skill. We also tend to have very strong internal moral systems. This doesn't necessarily mean strong sense of justice. I like to avoid that because it doesn't necessarily mean that our moral systems are correct. It just means that we can be quite stuck in what we consider to be right. There's also the exhaustion and fatigue. Again, burnout comes into play. There's the stereotypes, stigma, and misunderstandings that we have to constantly fight against. For example, something that I commonly experience is when I'm experiencing verbal shutdown, when I'm not able to verbally speak, I try and use a notepad or pen or my phone or even an AAC device. I get told off by people saying, oh, but I heard you verbally speak before. Why can't you just continue doing that? Even though I can't in that moment. So again, you're having to do double the work to also educate. And also intersectional identities do come into play. For example, with the police example I shared before, if you are a person of color, that can make things exceptionally more difficult and dangerous. Abroad, unfortunately, there have been quite a few deaths in this particular situation. If you also have a physical disability, you also have to deal with the barriers of that on top of everything. So again, if you're autistic, you can have other identities as well. So it can also make things a bit more challenging. And change itself is a joint effort. So the responsibility of enacting change cannot just be on the shoulders of autistic people alone. And it cannot be on the shoulders of, say, 5 autistic people. We all have to work together as well, as much as we are all capable of doing, because again, advocacy is challenging and it is very tiring. So I truly do believe that everyone has the ability to enact change. So even if we all do a little bit, hopefully the world would be a bit more accessible and inclusive. So what can we do to have a more neuroaffirmative and inclusive future? So again, I always say more awareness, acceptance, and action. We cannot have just awareness, just acceptance, and just action, but we all need to work together. I still do believe that there's a long way, even for autism awareness, even locally, even though it has improved significantly over the years. There's also, we need to include autistic people of all backgrounds, races, levels of support needs and experiences. We just need more variety in the autistic people that we are including. I would love to see more people with higher support needs and people who use AAC devices advocating locally, being given a platform locally. That is very much needed. We also need to give more tools and accessibility to also succeed and be able to self-advocate. If we do not give the platforms, the support, if we do not give the tools to people, then we are taking away their ability to succeed. And that means that less people will be able to advocate. So what can autistic people do? So what can we do? We have to, first of all, learn about ourselves. We have to learn about our boundaries, our preferences, our sources of joy, and our needs. This is incredibly important. I dare say this is the first step. And if you cannot do this, then maybe take a step back for the time being, because if you know what you need, if you know your boundaries, and if you know how to recharge, that's why I include sources of joy, then you'll be able to keep yourself safe and you'll be able to keep yourself sane while advocating, because again, it is super challenging. So first step is to learn about yourself. And there's many ways that you can do this. I personally learn through engaging with the community. I read a lot of books on disability studies. I read a lot of posts from autistic people. I especially love the Stimpunks Foundation website, and I'm in their community as well. And I also like using Sonny Jane Wise's DBT workbook as well, to be able to learn skills, to be able to better support myself. Another important thing is to unlearn internalized ableism and other harmful systems such as white privilege, capitalism, etc. These are all things that are interconnected. Even though they might not seem like it from the get-go, it is super important to unlearn these things before we are able to advocate, because unfortunately then we might be sharing these harmful views without even noticing. Also be able to advocate and be visible wherever and whenever possible. Again, someone might not necessarily be able to advocate wider scale all the time. Again, keeping yourself sane and safe is the first and important step. But whenever you can, even if it's a little bit, it is super helpful to be able to advocate for yourself. Even if, for example, you're just asking for one accommodation at hospital, you're still doing a lot of work for the rest of the community, even if you might not necessarily think it. And also, don't give up. Change is possible. Change is possible. I've seen a lot of change even in the last 10 years. And I really do believe that we can keep moving forward if we all do keep trying. Okay. Okay. So what can allistic people do? Allistic is the word for non-autistic people, if you don't know. So number one is learn from autistic people directly. If you don't know where to start, you can maybe start looking up the people that I had mentioned previously. We did send out the presentation, so you can go and look up their names. You can, and also especially to center autistic voices. So when you're sharing posts, try and share posts directly from autistic people. Try and keep an open mind, especially be flexible and think creatively. Sometimes it might be difficult to help or include an autistic person, especially in very rigid environments like education or healthcare. But with a bit more creative thinking, even the smallest changes can mean the world to us. And aim for progress, not perfection. Even if you do just a little bit, it's still progress. And you might get things wrong sometimes. That's why it's important to also keep an open mind. So if, for example, you do something that offends an autistic person or harms an autistic person, try and use that as a learning experience instead of just closing off completely. I believe I had another thing. No, I didn't. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, now's the time. You can either write in the chat or you can use the raise hand feature and ask any questions. Or even if you have experiences to share or comments or anything that we talked about, I'd love to hear you.
Two prior comments.
Two prior comments. Let me see. Okay, so we had some comments on what autism is. So Eleanor had said that I think that autism is not a disease or a personality type, it's a different way that the brain processes information. Yep, we talked about that before. I did include, again, I included the disease in the thought bubble to sort of challenge that. So just in case that wasn't clear. And we also had Josiane Vassaldo saying, I think autism is a different wiring of the brain. Yes, and that would be what the definition of neurotype is. Does anyone have any more questions or comments? Maybe any experiences that you've had on advocating as an autistic person or trying to support, for example, someone had mentioned that they are a mother of autistic people in the chat. Has there been significant challenges to giving them tools needed to advocate for themselves, for example? Okay. Also advocates at a local school. I think there's a lot of need for more there's a lot more need for knowledge about autism in education, especially. I think that is something that is unfortunately a bit lacking locally. And it's okay. So from that comment there, it was great to see how the kids viewed autism. I'm hoping that things are changing for the positive. I've noticed that a lot of, especially the younger generation, are a bit more accepting. Okay, and then after my presentation, I believe after speaking to 400 kids, a large handful changed their view. That's also great to hear. Again, representation and education and exposure does a lot of good. That's why I especially love that we are getting more autistic characters in animated series as well. I I believe that is a huge step forward as well. And it's great as well that you have that experience of having different profiles as well. So well done for that. We need more of you. Any other experiences, comments, questions? We have a raised hand. You can go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah. I'm not Alexander, I'm his mom. Yeah, I use his alone account. Yeah. So I'd like to ask a question, please. Sorry, I'm curious about situation with the, for example, at the moment, boy puberty period. So and he's a how to say his legal rights, yes, and because he's not small and he's not big yet, and his actions are different, yes, and because it's lots of hormones goes he goes through the lots of changes, yes, and because of a boys, they is a normally way, yeah, they get more aggressive and yeah, something like way. Uh, um, is it way up? Any experience will be useful if you can say, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
So I'm not a parent of an autistic person. I'm an autistic person myself, and I did not go through male puberty myself at a younger age. Even though I am on testosterone now, I think it's a bit different experience-wise. Of course, what I can say is that the rights are still the same for every person with disability. So no matter your age or your gender, those rights still do apply. When it comes to seeing ways to support him, what I would recommend is speaking to perhaps an occupational therapist or to be able to better guide you with how to find ways to support him and for him to support himself. But unfortunately, I can't give firsthand experiences from this. But yes.
Yeah, sorry, I made mistake. I mean, a responsibility, according to law. I mean, responsibility, not rights. It's I made mistake. Sorry, that's why as because he's a not a child. Yeah, not that small. Yeah, for example, and not so big in the middle. So if, for example, some actions are considered other kids, yes. So and it's could be something what is gives some kind of protection, yes, or something. Or no, it goes the same way, yeah, legally. No, yeah, I confuse you, yeah, with my question. Okay, no worries.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
see how best to, well, with legal, I can't really help with that either. I'm very sorry.
Oh, yes. That's,
So
yeah,
I'm
it's
not
okay. No
sure.
problem.
I'm not sure I'm
Yeah,
the best person to answer this question, but if you wish, I'm sure if you write to CRPD, there could be, we do have people who are specialized in legal responsibility, might be able to guide you better as well. Again, sorry that I can't answer your question
no
directly.
worries at all. Yeah, yeah, it's okay. I still an investigation because he's growing. I would like to know more about that.
Yes,
Thank you
of
very much.
course.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have Roberta Saliba next in line. Would you like to unmute?
Hello, hi, hope you're doing well. So, we come from a business basically, and we offer help to mothers regarding kids with autism. We work a lot with urgency approach. And I was wondering regarding how can we help the mother and the guardians basically regarding autism, and what questions should we ask to make sure that we learn more about autism and be able to help them out, especially. And there are courses as well that we can train our people as well so they are able to help more regarding these aspects.
Okay, so okay, there are three questions in there. So let me try and answer them best I can. So with regards to learning about autism, again, I do recommend seeking out resources and books, handbooks, etc., that were written by autistic people. I'm pretty sure that I have encountered books on parenting autistic people. Don't know any books offhand, unfortunately, as it's not my specific area of expertise in autism itself. One book that I can recommend if they're parents of low to medium support needs individuals is Chloe Hayden's Different Not Less, which speaks about her experience as an autistic person, but also does have tips for both the autistic person and the parents themselves. I would say that it's good for anyone 12 and up, and it's not particularly academic, so it's very accessible in that aspect. Um, uh, you also asked, sorry, I'm not very good at keeping track of three-part questions. You had also asked if there's any courses locally that I know of. No, unfortunately, this is something that I do think needs to be expanded on more, though there are quite frequently workshops that are held um, on different aspects of autism locally. A lot of them are focused on employment currently, but um, there's also a Facebook group for parents of autistic people that I know of. Is having support groups, them being able to speak to each other can also be quite important. I really do believe in the importance of community in that aspect. So maybe having a place for them to be supported as parents themselves can also be beneficial. Did I forget a part of the question? I'm trying to remember the last one, sorry.
So basically, what I was asking is basically if I can train them some way so they will be able to make sure that we help them as much as we can, because sometimes we face certain problems that unfortunately parents do not communicate well with us. So we try to give out the help, and we tend to get lost which way are we going to handle it. So I would like to train the person going there to be able to be open, especially, and have the most information regarding autism.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is needed. Unfortunately, I don't know of any service like this, but this is something I'll take note of. Maybe this can be something that could be developed, even in collaboration with other organizations. But unfortunately, again, I don't think Malta's quite there just yet. Sorry to disappoint. Um, I'm going to look at the chat because I've been neglecting that. So Antoine said, by the term advocacy, I meant how to treat the subject from legal aspect for autistic children. May I ask the difficulty of these autistic children are facing when they want to open a bank account? I wish to raise my concern of the difficulty of children when trying to use Facebook. And what about the guardianship application for autistic children in relation to inheritance? Okay. Okay. So, sorry, because it's in pink, so it's a bit difficult for me to read. Yeah, so advocacy in legal aspects is incredibly difficult for everyone, especially autistic people. This is something that I've been trying to create a resource for in something called Easy Language, which provides information in an easy to read format. Typically, it's used for people with intellectual disability, but it can be beneficial for a lot more people. And there's a list of words and phrases to do with legal rights that I hope to make things a bit more simple to understand. But unfortunately, this is something that's incredibly difficult. When it comes to, for example, opening a bank account, it again depends on the person, but it of course there's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of like numbers. You need to remember your passwords. You need to remember your all of your details. That can be all incredibly difficult to keep in mind. Being there face to face, being able to stay regulated in the bank environment when there's typically not a lot of noise suppression. These can all be significant barriers. So I would say that yes, it is exceptionally difficult for a lot of us to open things like bank accounts. Um, uh, yes, there is also concern with using social media in general, not only Facebook, but other social media accounts as well. I do believe that we need to have more training and safety for all kids, but especially autistic kids and youths when using social media, how to keep yourself safe, how to keep yourself from accidentally exposing private information that can get you again in trouble or be in an unsafe situation again. These are all things that do need to be trained, I believe. Um, so maybe as a parent, or if there's educators or people who work with autistic kids and youths here, maybe you can look up certain safety online, especially with the rise of AI. Keep those things in mind, for example, when sharing pictures, that these things can be manipulated in certain ways nowadays. Being able to pass on this information to either your autistic kid or youth, or the autistic person that you take care of, or if you are an autistic person yourself, it can be incredibly useful to be able to keep all these things in mind and be able to relay that information. Unfortunately, again, this is not a resource, like a training resource that we do have locally in development that I know of. Again, I will take note of this. Um, uh, and with regards to the guardianship application, this is unfortunately, again, not an area of expertise of mine, so I don't feel comfortable sharing something that might be incorrect. Again, maybe reaching out to CRPD would be able to guide you better on that aspect. Then we have Racine. So I teach at a local vocational school too. Sometimes it feels that students lack awareness, unfortunately. Yes, especially with the amount of bullying that is reported locally, I really don't believe that we do have the level of awareness we need. Is there updated studies to why there's a spike of recent years of autism? Maybe recent studies here in Malta. Okay, so studies in particular here locally published, I don't know of, but what I can say is that yes, there is a rise in autism diagnoses. That does not necessarily mean that there's a rise in autism. It just means that we have updated tools and we have updated awareness. Again, I don't believe we're quite there with awareness yet, but there is a lot more awareness, especially with online activists. A lot of us are learning that we might be autistic. That's how I learned that I might be autistic, from people sharing their experiences online. So with the sharing of information, updated tools, and updated training and awareness from the professionals themselves, people are getting their diagnoses more. Does not necessarily mean there's more autism. It just means that it's being recognized more, which is a positive thing. It's positive that people are learning about who they are, about what they need, and being able to get that support they might need. So that is why there's more apparent autism here. And then there's Tokyo, who recommended the book Hold On to Your Kids as a resource for parenting. It talks about how attachment is great, but it's human is how you give the kid what they need and how when they need it. Yes, I mean, again, autistic people are people, so a lot of things that work with other humans would probably work with us as well. Again, we're still people. So another recommendation is Life on the Bridge, helpful from autistic people themselves to parents or caregivers. Okay. Luis Bonici, so agency support hold a lot of parent support groups. That is true. Maybe the parents can be referred to them. We'll take note of that. I'm not sure that we'll have time to search for the links right now particular, but yes, there are also support groups online. If you're an autistic person yourself as well, there are currently groups for autistic people themselves. So there's that as well. I think that is all the questions. I hope that I covered most of them. I apologize that I could not give very detailed answers for some questions. I would prefer that I say if there's something that I don't know, then I give the wrong information. But again, I'm sure if you reach out with things, for example, for the legal rights, we do have a sector for that here, that they might be able to answer your questions better. And there are a lot of resources, again, online to learn about autism. I do recommend that you try and find resources from autistic people themselves. And I hope that this webinar was... Sorry, I hope that this webinar was useful, that you learned something new, and I hope that you have a good rest of the evening. Thank you very much for attending.